This is Reimagining Higher Education, your go-to podcast with remarkable education leaders sharing personal stories from their experience in and around the sector, including reflection and hope for progress in the sector. With your host, Sir Eric Thomas, former Vice-Chancellor at the University of Bristol, President of Universities UK and Chair of the Worldwide University Network, and now Studiosity Advisory Board Member. Welcome.
Welcome to all our listeners, and it's a particular pleasure for me to welcome Professor Karen Cox, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Kent, for this podcast. And we've got three fascinating subjects to explore with Karen. We're going to explore the leadership of a smaller university in comparison to Nottingham, a very big university, her previous university. We're going to explore the implications of Brexit to her and to the university sector, and also, finally, what it's like starting a new medical school. So just a small agenda, Karen, nothing, but really great welcome to you. Fantastic to see you. And I wonder if you could probably tell our audience just a little bit of your background, please.
Great. Well, thanks, Eric. It's a pleasure to speak with you, and particularly on those subjects, because, of course, all hugely important. So, yes, I joined the University of Kent as Vice-Chancellor and President back in 2017. And so been here nearly 6 years now. Prior to that, I was the Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Nottingham. But I came into universities and university leadership via a career in nursing and working in the NHS, particular speciality around cancer and palliative care. And through that clinical route, took a more research-orientated approach and PhD, spent a little bit of time in the States, and then my career at Nottingham. And I was at Nottingham for 23 years, Eric, which is quite scary, but wonderful. I had huge support in terms of developing my career there. Held every academic post, I think, from research assistant, research associate, research fellow, lecturer, senior lecturer, professor, pro vice chancellor, then deputy vice chancellor, and then, as I say, came to Kent, and maintained my professional registration and interest in nursing and health, and also sit on the board of the Nursing and Midwifery Council. That's a little potted history, if that's helpful.
Brilliant. I don't think I've ever told you, Karen, but I actually did contemplate a career in palliative care. I was rather Dame Cicely Saunders was really very high profile when I was a young junior doctor. And of course, I ended up at the other end of the life spectrum.
Yes, the bringing into life from. Yes.
Karen, I think what I wanted to talk to you about is running different sized institutions. I'll never forget Shirley when she was Vice-Chancellor of the University of Loughborough. And we were talking about leadership challenges. And she said, Eric, you're in charge of a big institution, and actually everything can't land on your desk because it would just be impossible for you to function. Whereas I'm in charge of an institution where almost everything lands on my desk, and I find it difficult to move away from that. And I wonder if that resonates with you a bit.
That does resonate, actually. I mean, I think it is. It's a huge privilege, isn't it, being able to have leadership roles in universities. But you're absolutely right. University of Nottingham, 35,000 students roughly in the UK, and then of course the China and Malaysia campuses. University of Kent, probably about half the number of students in the UK, and then the postgraduate study centres in Europe. So different scope and different scale. I think that there are pros and cons. So I think in terms of my experience at Kent, I would say that there is an opportunity with a university of this size and scale to genuinely get to know staff and students in quite a different way. And I think good fortune is that we do have the campus here in Canterbury and our other campus at Medway, which means that you do have genuinely a focal point and a real sense of community because of the facilities on the campuses, people coming onto the campus and living on campus as well. So you do have that sense of community. And I once described it as it feels like you can kind of get your arms around it. Whereas, of course, at Nottingham, it was a significantly different size and scope and scale. So you had to approach it quite differently. I think you're right about reflecting Shirley's experience. It does sometimes feel like that, that you're dealing with everything from why isn't the invoicing system working, right through to setting up new initiatives and working internationally. There's like absolutely everything, which in many ways I think is not a bad thing for a leader to be able to experience what's going on right across the whole institution. And I think the trick there is then to work out where you have to put your time. You also have to know that actually you've got a great senior team and colleagues across the institution who are much better placed to deal with things like why are the invoices not working, and to make sure that you don't get drawn into those areas where actually there are people better placed to deal with them, and you do need to keep focused on the things that you should be as a leader of an institution. I think the other thing, just to say, Eric, is it does mean that universities of this size and scope and scale, like Kent, can be actually quite agile, because they have to be. You have to move quite quickly on some things. You have to be very creative about how you make resources go further, because you have fewer of them. And that makes you then kind of be able to do some things quite quickly and quite creatively that you might not be able to necessarily do in an institution of a much bigger scale.
You also have you have two things. You have a smaller city with which to, which must be a much more intimate place. And the other very unusual thing for you, of course, is that city is the centre of the Church of England. And you have the, I remember a long time ago, Karen, I don't know if one of your predecessors was a professed atheist, which apparently did cause some local difficulties.
Robin Simpson.
Yes.
Yes. I met him just before he died. He was a wonderful character, actually. He reached out to me when he saw my appointment and invited me to, I then replied and said, oh, it would be wonderful just to say hello. And he invited me for a lunch, but it wasn't long before he died, unfortunately. But it was great to hear direct from him what the university was like in the 90s.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you feel that you have a more intimate relationship with the city because the city is smaller, or is it much the same? I mean, Nottingham University is crucial for Nottingham, but University of Kent is also crucial for that part of Kent.
No, I mean, I think what Nottingham has been doing both when I was there and now is hugely important in terms of its work with the city and the region. And I think one of the things that some of the learnings I took from that was to be thoughtful about how the university was positioned within the county and the region and with the local community. One of our strategic pillars is around our civic mission, and particularly how do we engage more purposefully with our local communities. And that's not just about outreach in schools and colleges. It's about how do we share our knowledge and resources and expertise, actually, with local communities, with businesses, working with partners to be able to bring resource into the county and into the region. So that's been one of the things I've worked really quite hard on, is not just building the relationships, but actually looking at what we can then do together that we couldn't do on our own. And the Canterbury angle is interesting because, of course, it's also a historical seat of learning, as well as it is as part of the kind of Anglican communion. So there's some really nice relationships that we do have with some of those civic society elements, whether it's with the cathedral or with community groups or with businesses and charities and organisations that, as I say, when we come together, we can do things really quite differently. I mean, the medical school would be an example of that. But
we can go on to that, yes. I mean, I think as time moves on, I remember some years ago now, maybe 10 or 12 or 15 years ago, that the University of Kent had this thing that they were the Transmanche University, that they were so well placed geographically next to Europe that they were going to be an exemplar of how to and I haven't explored the implications of Brexit for higher education, and I thought that yours was an idea. This is an ideal opportunity to what has it meant to you?
Oh, where to start, Eric? I mean, so you're absolutely right. I mean, Kent had positioned itself as the UK's European university. It was a label, I think, that was given to it in one of the media outlets, I think, but was absolutely authentic. Kent has a long history of working in and across Europe and with European universities and European colleagues and European students. And as a region, of course, Kent is the kind of gateway into Europe. So the geography, there's the history. Many of our academic programs have distinctive European elements to them. And then, of course, the postgraduate study centres that we had in Europe were also signals of that strength and relationship. So it was genuine and it was authentic. We had significant numbers of EU students from the EU and staff. That I have to say that has absolutely changed since the Brexit referendum, and I feel it's very sad.
Yes.
We of course have continued to maintain and build our relationships across Europe with our European university colleagues. I would mention Lille, Ghent, and Leuven as three partners that we particularly work well with and have a commitment to building on those relationships. But we also still have our postgraduate study centres, and we have strong teaching and research partnerships across Europe too. So that, of course, still remains. But what we have seen is a massive reduction in the number of students from the EU coming to study at the university, as many universities have experienced as well. But because we were so geographically close, because of the history, we did have significant numbers from the EU, and that has all changed. So it's changed, of course, it has an impact financially, but it has an impact in terms of the way that diversity is kind of reflected throughout the university. It's different. And I think many colleagues would acknowledge that as well, that it is something that we've experienced in a way that we would wish we hadn't had to. As I say, we've continued to build the relationships and partnerships, but that loss of the inflow of students, I think, is something that we really do absolutely regret as one of the fallouts from that Brexit referendum.
I mean, I was just thinking as you were talking there that, of course, students from India and students from the Americas and students from Southeast Asia tend to be Anglophonic. Almost by definition, they have to be. Whereas your European students bring European languages and a very profound sense of a European culture to your institution.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that I would, when reflecting on that diversity piece, of course we have a hugely diverse student population. But I do feel that those elements are being diluted in terms of that European dimension and perspective. And of course, we still have visiting groups from Europe. We have a lot of conferencing and events that we still are hosting that are bringing young people across from the continent into the UK. But I feel that it is something that is a loss for us. And
have you lost research money?
Well, we did have significant research funding from the European Research Council, and our colleagues were particularly successful in achieving grant success through that route. But of course, with all of the uncertainty around affiliation with Horizon, the Horizon scheme, I mean, it's just meant that colleagues, of course, are wary about where they're applying and what they're applying for and who they're applying with. And I think it's really impacted again on that ability to be able to access that kind of funding with those kinds of collaborators. And yet again, a huge disappointment, and something that we had hoped would be resolved, Eric. It just feels that at the moment it's going in a very negative direction in terms of the ability of UK researchers.
And is that the same for staff, Karen?
Yes.
Have you,
yeah.
You have staff who've gone back to the European mainland saying,
yes, a number of colleagues have chosen to, I mean, people are always kind of, there's always some movement across the sector. But there have been a number of colleagues who've chosen to go back to mainland Europe because of the changes around Brexit. And again, hugely sad for us when colleagues feel that decision that we took in 2016 has meant that they no longer feel able to work in the UK and to be part of the UK higher education sector.
I know. Do you find, when I travel around Europe, the further away you get from the UK, the less important Brexit appears to be. So,
Yeah.
In the very best way, the French have taken this quite personally. I mean,
Yes.
you get the impression, and actually, I don't blame them, to be honest with you. When you go down to Italy, there's less importance. I mean, I'm caricaturing it, or is that how you find it?
Well, I think it's all depends on the relationships, doesn't it? And I think that there's the geographical relationship that depends how close you are and what the interactions were and the relationships that you had as to how you then feel about not being part of it anymore. So yes, I think there must be ranges of views and experiences right across Europe as to the impact that Brexit has had, and that will all be dependent on what the relationships were and collaborations and partnerships and what the benefits were seen to be of being part of the UK, being part of the EU, that have been lost now. And for some that would mean more than it does for others, and it's probably expressed in some of the ways that you've articulated.
Sure, I did. I mean, it's a rather cruel question, but I mean, could you identify anything that's good that's happened as a result? I mean, I don't think we thought in prospect that Brexit was a good idea for HE at all. I mean, I'm not articulating anything I didn't articulate before the referendum.
I think that higher education across the UK was very pro Europe, and has been hugely disappointed by both the outcome of the referendum and then the subsequent consequences. I know that's not a view that is held universally, and of course we're all free to hold our views and positions. But I do feel that we've not, in many ways, seen any particular benefits of not being in the EU. So and I say that as someone who is very open to being persuaded and wanting benefits, but I'm not sure that we've particularly seen anything that is really a step change or significant over the last few years.
I mean, just as an aside, but an interesting aside, I did a podcast with Steve Smith,
right,
and who's our international education champion, and of course we've seen a massive influx from Indian students as international students, and that was because Boris Johnson decided to allow them to do post-study work. And that was what transformed that flow. So often you don't quite know what's working in why students will come to to universities or not. And he reckoned that was the most powerful reason we've seen this increase.
Yeah, that change to the sort of visa routes and the opportunities post graduation do make a difference, I believe, to the choices that people make. And as we know, international students are a really important part of UK higher education, and it's something we must absolutely continue to
absolutely. So I don't know if you saw the workforce planning thing that was trailed for the medical and clinical workforce. It was trailed in the last 2 days, but increase nurses by 35,000 or something, and increase doctors by 15,000 a year, and let's have 8 new medical schools, and as if somehow or other that can transform things overnight, Karen, which we know only too well can't. But I always used to joke with the presidents of American universities that the person that terrified them most was the dean of medicine. Huge research budgets, often running great big hospitals, and a medical school does alter a university. There's no question. And you're one of the new medical schools that you've just set up, and I just wondered. It must be full of opportunity, of course, and I just wondered how it had been over the last 2 to 3 years.
I mean, I think Kent Medway Medical School has been one of the things that I'm particularly proud of in terms of my tenure here at Kent. Having arrived in 2017, had some prior conversations with colleagues about this because they recognised there was an opportunity that was likely to come through in terms of government announcements around increasing the number of medical school places, and that there was likely to be an opportunity to establish some new medical schools on the back of that. I think the county of Kent had been particularly affected by not having a medical school, in that it was becoming very difficult to recruit and retain a healthcare workforce, a medical workforce in particular. And there were some really challenging issues around health outcomes, particularly in our coastal communities, that we know from past experience that if you intervene by putting a medical school in that situation, you can actually change the way that people think about wanting to live and work in a region and have a career in medicine and healthcare in that region, because the medical school, by being based in that region, means that people have studied and lived and worked in the region and are more likely to stay. Having a medical school means that colleagues who work in those services, health and clinical services, are also able to be involved in teaching and research, and that is great in terms of enhancing a career and somebody's working day, actually, because it's varied and challenging. And we know as well, if you put a medical school in an environment, you can start to change people's health outcomes because of all of the interconnectedness of having an environment in which people want to come and work and contribute to those healthcare services. So Kent had missed out on that for a number of years, and so this was a huge opportunity. And Eric, I have to say, I can't fault the support that both universities. This is a Kent Medway Medical School. There's a joint collaboration between the University of Kent and Canterbury Christ Church University. When we were putting the bid together, we had nothing but support from our city councils, county council, all of our local MPs, all of the NHS Trust boards. The bid that went in, I've never seen such a set of supporting letters. It was absolutely fantastic. The county absolutely wanted this and has backed it 100%. We were utterly delighted when we got the news in 2018 that we'd been successful for setting up the medical school with 100 places. Of course, that didn't come with any additional funding. We get the funding for the students, but we had no setup costs. So we've had to fund that through the two universities and the support from the region through the local enterprise partnership, from the NHS, from trusts and foundations, and from individual donors. And through that, we've been able to raise about 25 million to support both the capital costs and the revenue costs as part of the setup. And I'd just like to say a huge thank you to our donors who support a significant number of scholarships for our students. And Eric, that can be an individual, or it can be, we've had district councils, Medway Council funds a specific Medway scholarship. I mean, to have that level of support has just been wonderful. So it's been a great initiative for the county. I think if you talk to NHS colleagues, they would say already it's had an impact on the way that when they're recruiting for new staff, new consultants, for example, that they would be saying, we also know you've got a medical school now and we want to be involved in part of that. And that's huge in terms of the impact already. We're in year 3 of delivering the programme, opened in 2020. And I just think it's, it's been great for the county, but it's also been great for both universities, because I think it's brought a completely fresh and new way of being able to deliver something collaboratively, but to draw on the individual strengths of the universities. And I think that's something that, whilst challenging, of course, working across institutions is never straightforward, but has been one of the things that we've been most pleased about, but also proud of.
I mean, and one of the great fortunes for this initiative is that they had a vice chancellor at the University of Kent who was an old NHS hand. And there are two things I was going to bring up about introducing, in inverted commas, the NHS into a university world. First of all, NHS culture is very, very different to university culture. And I'd be interested in your observation. You and I know how to navigate NHS culture. But if you were a historian, it would appear like a foreign land to you. And secondly, what always struck me was that the rate of change in the NHS is unbelievably rapid. And, things happen, bang, 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 and events occur and at a rate that just doesn't happen like that in universities. And so suddenly you've got this one aspect of your university that's behaving in a really rather different way.
I think that's a really good way to describe it. And that can be, like you say, a real kind of culture challenge when you've got this entity that is both new, so it's in setup phase, so you're having to do things differently, you're having to think about things in ways that you might not necessarily have thought about before. So I think that whole challenge to systems, challenge to decision-making speeds, challenge to, well, we don't normally do it like this. There's been that constant challenge, and that can create friction at times. So I think it's also, though, how you turn that into, well, what do we learn about this in terms of how to set up something that's not only about working across 2 institutions and bringing something new into those institutions, but it's also absolutely got to be delivered in partnership with this other organisation, which, as you say, is very different. I mean, the NHS is huge. It's got its own challenges in terms of workforce issues, finance issues, issues about its kind of form and function, and we have to interface with that because, of course, our students are spending a significant amount of their time in those institutions, in the NHS, as part of their clinical learning. So I think one of the things we've found really helpful is the fact that there is a way in which we've tried, as part of the senior leadership team, to and been invited on, we haven't imposed ourselves on, but we've been invited onto those trust boards that we work with, the largest trusts in the region, and that's been hugely helpful for just understanding what's happening in each organisation and building the relationships, because I think, Eric, as you've alluded to, actually a lot of this is built on relationships and the ability to navigate the different worlds, but you can only do that if you've got a relationship and therefore can build an understanding. So yes, you're right. I did have an advantage in that I came from that background, and that has, I hope, been hugely helpful. But I think it's been particularly important that we recognise the role that the medical school and the staff and the dean have played in the significant legwork that they've had to put in building relationships, because of all the placements in GP practices are incredibly varied and different, and then the more acute settings. And yes, it's been a real challenge as well as a joy. I mean, it's just been great.
I bet you. And has it allowed you? We've got about 3 or 4 minutes left, Karen. Right? Has it allowed you to build a different kind of curriculum a different interdisciplinarity? I mean, have you built your curriculum up from the base, or did you take somebody else's and kind of
our partner medical school, because of course, with a new medical school, you have to have a partner school until you're fully accredited, and that won't be until our graduates come through in 2025. So we're really pleased to be working with Brighton and Sussex Medical School. So we have to broadly use their curriculum. But one of the reasons we chose Brighton and Sussex was because it had a very strong community focus, public primary health care, and also had a great way of engaging with students in terms of the way that curriculum was constructed, and then the way that they took student feedback and fed that through in a really consistent way. So I think it's meant that we've been able to use a curriculum that very much resonated with the approach we wanted to take, which was about access and it was about community. But then actually having the medical school has meant that we've taken opportunities to think about the approach we take to learning and teaching, which is very much a digital first approach. So we've been quite innovative in the way that we've been delivering the curriculum. Of course, there's face-to-face, but it's about providing that content digitally so students get access wherever they are, and particularly when they're on placements. That's been incredibly helpful. And the other piece, as you quite rightly say, is around interdisciplinarity. So making sure that these students are not just learning with other medical students, but that they're exposed to students right across both universities as well, which is, it just means it's hugely diverse. And then what's coming through next is an opportunity to look at research. And we've just had some funds to set up a chair in coastal and rural healthcare, which is just fantastic because it absolutely resonates with what we need here in Kent in terms of a focus on research around those health outcomes in those communities.
Right, fantastic. I just as an aside, I was rather intrigued by the workforce recommendation that you could be a clinical nurse specialist, but also be part-time studying to become to work towards finals in medicine.
Yes.
And actually graduate as a doctor. I mean, it was just an intriguing, and that it didn't spook the medical establishment, which really surprised.
No, I think there's a lot more innovation and creativity now coming through in terms of how do we educate a workforce for delivering healthcare in the future. And I feel that actually in the future we do have to start to look at how do we, some of these professional boundaries are going to be much more blurred, and that doesn't take anything away from the huge importance of those individual professions, but I think increasingly it's about how do you bring things together to deliver healthcare that's needed in the 21st century, which I think is going to be quite challenging going forward. It is a lot about care, public health care and delivering care at home and community, and looking after frail older people, which we will all do.
Well, Karen, our time has come. The one thing I can tell from just the way you're speaking and from your body language, that there's really loads of fabulous challenges at Kent, and that it's a wonderful university and a wonderful place with some particular issues for Kent. New medical school size, thank
you, Eric. It's a pleasure to talk about it. I feel hugely privileged to be Vice Chancellor here, and yes, it's been something that has been a real joy.
A real joy.
So thank you for allowing me to have the conversation.
Yeah, that's right. And I did recommend to you that you should go to the Pig Hotel near Canterbury.
Yes.
Have you been there yet?
Yes. Great food and a really nice atmosphere. Yes. It's great.
Karen, thanks very much indeed.
Fantastic to talk to you. Pleasure to talk to you.
Visit studiosity.com/studentsfirst for the next Students First Symposium, an open forum for faculty, staff and academics to candidly discuss and progress the issues that matter most in higher education.